It was a crisp, overcast Monday morning, and the school hallways buzzed with the usual chatter and energy that always made the start of the week seem brighter. Students swarmed in, filling lockers and checking assignments, greeting friends after the weekend. But as Leo walked into his homeroom, all that noise seemed to grow quieter, eventually settling into murmurs, then silence, and finally, snickers. He could feel the weight of their stares, the way their eyes traced the worn-out patches on his trousers, the frayed collar on his shirt, and the visible dust marks on his shoes. He tried his best to clean his clothes, washing them in the tiny sink at home the night before, scrubbing hard to erase the signs of his weekend labor. But they were stained, threadbare, evidence of long hours spent working just to keep his family afloat. Leo's face flushed as he made his way to his seat, pretending not to hear the whispers from his classmates around him. "Looks like someone slept in the dumpster," one boy muttered to his friend, who snickered in agreement. Leo could feel the heat in his cheeks, but he said nothing, keeping his eyes focused on the worn edge of his notebook. His hands were rough, calloused, and aching from the long shifts he'd pulled at the nearby gas station, but he clenched them under the desk, forcing himself to ignore the cruel laughter. In the middle of all this, Mr. Adams, the homeroom teacher, walked in, immediately catching the unsettling mood in the room. He looked around, noticing the stifled laughter and smirks as students nudged each other and looked toward Leo's direction. With a firm tone, Mr. Adams called the class to order, instantly silencing the chatter. His gaze lingered on Leo for a brief moment, recognizing the shame in the boy's lowered head and the defiance mixed with embarrassment in his clenched fists. Class moved forward as usual, with Mr. Adams calling on students for their answers and reviewing the previous week's assignments, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As the bell rang, marking the end of homeroom, he noticed Leo was the first to bolt from his seat, slipping quickly into the hallway to avoid any more unwanted attention. Mr. Adams watched him go, a heavy feeling settling in his chest. He'd been teaching long enough to recognize a student struggling in silence, and Leo's quiet resilience caught his attention. There was a story behind those tired eyes and worn-out clothes, and Mr. Adams couldn't ignore it. Determined to find out more, he followed Leo down the hallway, catching up to him just outside the classroom. "Leo," he called out gently, causing the boy to stop in his tracks. Leo turned around, his gaze hesitant and guarded. "Could you stay after class for a moment? I'd like to have a quick chat." There was a flicker of panic in Leo's eyes, but he nodded, mumbling in agreement before hurrying off to his next class. The rest of the morning passed slowly for Leo. Despite his best efforts to focus on his classes, the words of his classmates echoed in his mind, each laugh and whispered insult gnawing at him. He tried to push the feelings away, reminding himself of his purpose, the reason he worked so hard every single day. Since his father's sudden passing 2 years ago, everything had changed. His mother, once vibrant and full of life, now worked long hours cleaning offices just to cover the basics. But it was never enough. Leo had taken it upon himself to contribute, juggling schoolwork with evening shifts and weekend jobs. He often went without, choosing to save what little he earned to help pay for his younger siblings' school supplies and ensure they didn't have to face the same taunts he endured. When the last bell rang, Leo packed up his things, bracing himself for the conversation with Mr. Adams. He thought about ducking out, slipping through the side door, and disappearing into the crowd of students headed home. But he respected Mr. Adams, a teacher who always made an effort to connect with his students and seemed genuinely interested in their lives. With a resigned sigh, Leo made his way back to the homeroom. Mr. Adams was waiting, seated at his desk, scribbling something in his notebook. He looked up as Leo entered, offering a warm smile that made Leo's shoulders relax slightly. "Come on in, Leo," Mr. Adams said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Leo sat down, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his backpack. The silence stretched between them until Mr. Adams finally spoke. "I noticed the way some of the other students were treating you this morning. I wanted to check in and see if you're all right." Leo felt a lump rise in his throat, but he swallowed it down, shrugging his shoulders nonchalantly. "It's nothing, sir. They don't understand." He tried to play it off, forcing himself to look unaffected, but Mr. Adams wasn't convinced. "Leo, you don't have to brush it off," Mr. Adams replied gently. "You're a hardworking student. I see that every day. But I also see the exhaustion in your eyes, and I know you're carrying more weight than most students your age. If there's anything you need, any way I can help, please don't hesitate to tell me." For a brief moment, Leo felt an overwhelming urge to open up, to tell Mr. Adams about the long hours, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices he made to ensure his siblings had a better life. But the vulnerability felt too raw, too close to the surface. He feared that if he started talking, he wouldn't be able to stop. So instead, he simply nodded, offering a small, tight-lipped smile. "Thank you, Mr. Adams. I'll be okay." Mr. Adams sensed that he wouldn't get more out of Leo today, but he wasn't ready to let the matter go. He decided to take matters into his own hands. That evening, after all the students had left, he made his way to Leo's neighborhood, wanting to see the world his student inhabited. As he walked down the dimly lit street, he caught sight of Leo, lugging bags of groceries up the stairs to his apartment. Mr. Adams watched from a distance, his heart heavy as he saw Leo hand over the bags to his tired-looking mother, who gave her son a grateful hug. The teacher realized then just how much this young boy shouldered, and he made a silent promise to help lighten that load. Later that night, Mr. Adams couldn't shake the image of Leo struggling up those narrow stairs, carrying the weight of his family on shoulders far too young for such a burden. The look in Leo's mother's eyes had been one of exhaustion and gratitude, a mix he had seen often enough among families who had barely enough to get by. Leo was a quiet kid, polite, hardworking, and never one to ask for help, but the scene Mr. Adams had witnessed revealed a reality he hadn't fully grasped. That night, he stayed up, going over every possible way he might lend a hand without making Leo feel uncomfortable or pitied. The next day, Mr. Adams pulled a few strings, reaching out to some friends and acquaintances who had connections with various community support programs. He didn't want Leo to know about this yet. He needed to understand the boy's situation more deeply first. After all, no amount of well-meaning support would make a difference if Leo wasn't open to accepting it. Mr. Adams decided that he would simply be there, watching over Leo in the background, offering small gestures of kindness without drawing too much attention. He knew kids Leo's age could be proud, especially when they'd taken on the responsibility of holding a family together. At school, Leo arrived the following day, looking a bit more weary than usual. The sleepless nights were beginning to show, the shadows under his eyes were darker, and his face looked gaunt. Still, he moved through his day with quiet resilience, forcing a smile when necessary and keeping his head low to avoid any attention. But attention was hard to avoid in a world where everyone around him noticed even the smallest detail. His classmates continued to mock him, throwing cruel comments his way whenever they caught him alone in the hallway. "Hey Leo," a boy sneered as he walked by, "didn't your mom ever teach you how to wash your clothes?" Another joined in, nudging his friend and laughing. "Guess you get your wardrobe from the trash." Each word felt like a jab, but Leo kept walking, ignoring the voices that seemed to get louder with each passing day. The mocking laughter that echoed down the hall only fueled his determination. He reminded himself why he was doing all this. His younger siblings needed him. Without his help, they wouldn't be able to stay in school, and Leo refused to let them face the same life of hardship he had resigned himself to. After school, Leo went straight to the local gas station, where he worked most evenings. The owner, an older man named Mr. Kowalski, knew Leo's story and respected his quiet strength. Mr. Kowalski was a gruff, no-nonsense man, but over time, he'd grown fond of Leo, even slipping him extra hours whenever he could. On this particular evening, Mr. Kowalski noticed the fatigue etched into Leo's face and decided to break his usual silence. "You look tired, kid," he said, handing Leo a rag and a bottle of cleaner to start on the countertops. "Maybe you ought to take a break for a few minutes. Get a drink of water. Sit down." Leo shook his head, giving Mr. Kowalski a determined smile. "I'm all right, sir. Thanks, though. I can keep going." The older man grunted, nodding in reluctant approval. "Suit yourself. Just don't push yourself too hard, all right? There's only so much one kid can do." Mr. Kowalski's words echoed in Leo's mind as he scrubbed down the counters, his thoughts drifting to his siblings, their hopeful faces, and their dreams. He knew he was their only shot at a better life, and the weight of that responsibility both crushed and motivated him. That night, when Leo finally stumbled home, he found his mother waiting for him, a worried look on her face. She was a thin woman with soft eyes that had grown hollow over the years, her hands calloused from endless hours of cleaning offices. She reached out, brushing a gentle hand across his face, her touch filled with silent gratitude. "You don't have to do all this, Leo," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You're still so young. You should be out there, studying, playing with your friends, not working yourself to the bone." Leo gave her a reassuring smile, though he knew his exhaustion showed. "It's all right, Mom. We're a team, remember? And this is just temporary. One day, things will be different." But as he spoke, Leo wondered if he truly believed his own words. Part of him wanted desperately to hope, but another part of him knew the harsh reality. They were barely scraping by, and he didn't see how things could ever really change. Meanwhile, Mr. Adams couldn't ignore what he had seen and heard. He continued to check in on Leo subtly, looking for any opportunity to help. One day, he found Leo sitting alone in the cafeteria, staring at an empty tray while his classmates around him laughed and enjoyed their lunches. Mr. Adams felt a pang in his heart, watching Leo pretend not to care about his empty stomach. He knew the boy was likely skipping meals to save money for his family. "Leo," Mr. Adams said, approaching with a warm smile, "mind if I join you?" Leo looked up, momentarily surprised, but then nodded, grateful for the company. Mr. Adams sat down, striking up a conversation about homework and upcoming school projects, making Leo feel more at ease. Then, casually, Mr. Adams slid a sandwich across the table, acting as if it was no big deal. "Leftovers from my lunch," he said with a wink. "Can't let good food go to waste, right?" Leo hesitated, but his empty stomach betrayed him. After a moment, he accepted the sandwich, muttering a quiet "thank you" as he took a bite. Mr. Adams watched him, hiding the sadness in his eyes. He could see how thin Leo had become, and he knew this small act of kindness wouldn't be enough. Days turned into weeks, and Mr. Adams continued to look for ways to help Leo discreetly. He began to notice small changes. Some students, influenced by Mr. Adams' subtle nudges, began treating Leo with more kindness. The teasing hadn't completely stopped, but it had lessened. Leo, however, remained guarded, used to the mocking and still skeptical of anyone's sudden kindness. But Jake, one of the boys who had once teased him the most, had started watching Leo with a different look in his eyes, something closer to curiosity than cruelty. One evening, Jake was walking home when he saw Leo leaving the gas station, wiping grease off his hands as he walked to the bus stop. Jake paused, observing the tired slump in Leo's shoulders, the quiet determination in his steps. The image stayed with Jake, lingering in his mind even after he'd reached home. That night, he mentioned it to his father, who nodded thoughtfully. "You know, son, sometimes people are fighting battles we know nothing about," his father said, leaning back in his chair. "It's easy to judge from the outside, but it takes courage to understand someone's story." Jake was silent, his father's words settling into his heart. The next day, he found himself watching Leo during lunch, wondering what it was like to live the life Leo did. And so, against the grain of his usual behavior, Jake walked up to Leo in the hallway and offered a hesitant smile. "Hey, Leo," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Look, I know we haven't exactly been friends, but I saw you working last night. You're doing a lot, aren't you?" Leo looked at him, surprise flickering in his eyes before he quickly masked it, shrugging as though it were nothing. "Just doing what I have to," he replied simply. Jake nodded, suddenly unsure of what to say. But as he walked away, he felt a sense of respect growing within him. A respect for Leo's quiet strength and resilience, for the boy who bore his hardships in silence. That was the beginning of a change in Jake, a small but significant shift that would ripple outward, touching others in ways he couldn't yet imagine. As for Mr. Adams, he continued his mission quietly, determined to help Leo in ways that would respect the boy's pride and dignity. The more he learned about Leo's situation, the more he realized that this young boy was teaching him about resilience, humility, and the quiet strength that often goes unnoticed. And though he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, Mr. Adams felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that perhaps, with the right kind of support, Leo's life could change in ways he never dreamed possible. Leo's life had settled into a rhythm of exhaustion, one that he accepted without complaint. His days were a blur of classes, part-time jobs, and sleepless nights spent helping his siblings with homework. But beneath the surface, small, almost imperceptible changes had begun to take root. His classmates no longer taunted him as loudly, and Jake, one of the boys who had once been at the forefront of the mocking, had started lingering around, offering nods of encouragement or sharing a seat with Leo in classes where no one else would sit near him. Leo noticed these gestures but found it hard to trust them fully. Years of struggling alone had taught him to rely on himself, to carry his burdens silently and avoid asking for help. One late afternoon, after a grueling shift at the gas station, Leo was about to head home when he noticed Jake waiting outside. Leo felt a flicker of irritation. He didn't want pity, and he didn't need anyone to pretend to care just to ease their own conscience. But Jake's expression was earnest, and he seemed genuinely concerned. With a hesitant smile, Jake walked up to him. "Hey, Leo," Jake started awkwardly, hands shoved deep into his pockets. I saw you working here last night too. Do you ever get a break?" Leo shrugged, giving a short laugh that was void of humor. "Not really," he replied, shifting the weight of his backpack. "It's just how things are. Gotta keep up with things at home." Jake looked down, unsure how to continue, but then he asked, "Do you want to grab a bite? My dad gave me some extra money, and I thought maybe you'd want to join me. Just, as friends." There was a vulnerability in his voice, a sense of sincerity that caught Leo off guard. He hesitated, not wanting to take advantage of Jake's offer, but feeling the pangs of hunger gnawing at him. He hadn't eaten much that day, having skipped lunch to save a few extra dollars. After a moment, Leo nodded. "All right," he said softly. "Thanks, Jake." They walked to a small diner nearby, and as they sat down to eat, Leo felt a strange sense of relief. He was used to eating alone, always on the go, and never allowing himself the luxury of a warm meal shared with a friend. They chatted about school, sports, and teachers, and for the first time in a long while, Leo felt like a regular teenager. As they finished their meal, Jake looked at him with a newfound respect. "Leo, I never realized how much you're handling on your own. I don't know if I could do it." Leo gave a small smile, his eyes tired but grateful for the understanding. "Sometimes you don't have a choice," he replied. "It's just life, Jake nodded, understanding more than he let on. The two boys left the diner, a quiet camaraderie forming between them. Over the next few weeks, Jake continued to stick by Leo's side, defending him when classmates made snide comments and even helping Leo study when he fell behind in class. Leo was hesitant at first, but slowly he began to let his guard down, grateful for the friendship he hadn't realized he needed. Meanwhile, Mr. Adams had not forgotten his mission to help Leo. One evening, he found himself visiting a local community center where he had friends who worked with youth programs. He explained Leo's situation, hoping to find a way to provide some sort of relief for the boy without making him feel as though he was a charity case. After a few discussions, one of his contacts suggested a discreet scholarship fund that could help cover some of Leo's educational expenses and provide meals while he was at school. They also agreed to keep it anonymous, understanding how important it was for Leo to feel a sense of pride and independence. With the plan in motion, Mr. Adams began discreetly arranging for Leo to have access to a weekly allowance for school supplies, and the cafeteria staff agreed to offer him meals at no cost without drawing attention. Leo, who had been dreading the weekly challenge of finding enough money to cover his siblings' school supplies, was astonished when his teachers began handing out supplies without question. He didn't ask why, but deep down, he suspected Mr. Adams had something to do with it. A quiet gratitude settled in his heart, mingled with a sense of relief he hadn't felt in a long time. One evening, as Leo was leaving the gas station, he saw Jake waiting for him outside once again. But this time, Jake wasn't alone. He had brought a small group of their classmates, some of whom had once laughed at Leo's worn clothes and tired face. Leo tensed, unsure what to expect, but Jake gave him a reassuring smile. "Hey Leo," Jake started, looking slightly nervous himself. "I told some of the guys about everything you're doing, helping your family and all. And we wanted to help too, if that's okay with you." Leo looked around, his eyes darting from one familiar face to the next. Some of the students shifted uncomfortably, clearly feeling the weight of their past cruelty. But there was an honesty in their eyes, an earnestness that told Leo they meant it. Jake continued, "We all pitched in, and we got you some things. Nothing much. But," he motioned toward a small stack of supplies. Basic items like notebooks, pens, even a new backpack. Leo stared at the items, a mix of emotions flooding through him. Pride battled with gratitude, embarrassment with relief. He had never expected this. He had always imagined that his struggles were his alone, a silent fight he would endure without anyone else knowing or caring. "Thank you," Leo whispered, his voice choked with emotion. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he could manage. The group nodded, some offering awkward pats on the back, others giving him a smile. For the first time, Leo felt a sense of acceptance, a feeling that maybe he wasn't as alone as he had thought. As he walked home that night, Leo's heart was lighter than it had been in years. The small gestures of kindness he had experienced over the past few weeks had transformed him, making him realize that sometimes even the smallest bit of help could make an insurmountable burden feel a little lighter. He thought of his siblings, their bright eyes filled with hope each time he handed them a new book or school supply, and he felt a renewed sense of purpose. But the quiet was short-lived. Later that week, Leo's mother fell seriously ill, her body worn down from years of hard work and sacrifice. Leo was devastated, torn between his responsibilities to his family and the fear of losing the only parent he had left. He spent countless hours at her bedside, juggling work and school, barely managing to keep up with everything. Word spread quickly among the teachers and students, and Mr. Adams, who had been watching over Leo closely, stepped in once again. Through the network of community resources he had carefully arranged, Mr. Adams found a program that provided medical assistance for families in need. With their help, Leo's mother was admitted to the hospital for treatment, and for the first time, Leo could breathe a sigh of relief. The entire community seemed to rally around him. Classmates, teachers, even neighbors, all offering what little support they could. In the days that followed, Leo began to realize that the community's kindness wasn't just a fleeting act of pity. It was a genuine, heartfelt response to his quiet resilience, an acknowledgement of the strength he had shown in the face of hardship. Each gesture, each word of encouragement, was a reminder that he didn't have to bear the weight of the world alone. One evening, as he sat by his mother's bedside, watching her rest peacefully for the first time in weeks, Leo felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. For so long he had been fighting alone, holding his struggles close to his chest, fearing judgment and rejection. But now, surrounded by a community that had shown him compassion and understanding, he felt a new sense of belonging, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was allowed to lean on others. When his mother finally woke up, her eyes filled with tears as she looked at her son. "Leo," she whispered, her voice weak but filled with pride. "You've done so much more than anyone could ever ask of you." Leo took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We're going to be okay, Mom," he replied softly, his heart swelling with a mixture of hope and gratitude. For the first time in years, he felt that the future was something he could look forward to, a journey he wouldn't have to face alone. As his mother gradually recovered, Leo found himself standing at a crossroads he hadn't anticipated. He'd spent so long focused on survival, on shouldering responsibilities far beyond his years, that the concept of a future, one where he could pursue his own dreams, felt distant, almost impossible. But now, with the unexpected kindness of his community and Mr. Adams's quiet support, the possibility of that future began to feel real. One day, while visiting his mother at the hospital, Leo was approached by a woman he hadn't seen before. She wore a smart, professional outfit, and her eyes held a warmth that immediately put him at ease. She introduced herself as Mrs. Turner, the director of a local youth support organization that Mr. Adams had reached out to on his behalf. She explained that her organization provided mentorship, scholarship opportunities, and resources to help young people like Leo find their way. "I know you've been through more than most kids your age," she said gently, sitting across from him in the hospital waiting room. "But I want you to know that your hard work hasn't gone unnoticed. We see your potential, Leo, and we want to help you in any way we can." Leo shifted uncomfortably, still unused to receiving such attention. Part of him felt unworthy, but another part, the part that still dared to dream, felt a glimmer of hope. Mrs. Turner handed him a brochure and explained that, if he was willing, her organization could provide him with a mentor, someone who could guide him academically and emotionally as he navigated his final years of high school. They could also offer financial assistance, which would allow him to reduce his work hours and focus more on his studies. Overwhelmed, Leo nodded quietly, clutching the brochure in his hands as if it were a lifeline. He knew accepting help would mean letting go of the self-reliance he had clung to for so long, but he also recognized that he couldn't keep pushing himself this hard forever. The strain was starting to take its toll, and he didn't want his siblings to carry the same burdens he had. They deserved a chance to dream freely, unburdened by hardship. The weeks that followed marked a profound turning point in Leo's life. With his mother's health slowly improving and the support from Mrs. Turner's organization, Leo allowed himself to scale back on his work hours. He still helped out at the gas station part-time, but he now had more time to focus on his studies and even joined an after-school study group. Jake often joined him, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Jake was no longer just a friend. He had become an ally, someone who understood Leo's journey and was willing to walk alongside him. One evening, while they were studying together, Jake brought up a topic that Leo had almost forgotten: college. "Have you thought about what you want to do after high school?" Jake asked, looking at Leo with genuine curiosity. Leo hesitated. He had pushed aside any thoughts of college, convinced it was out of reach. Between supporting his family and keeping up with school, he hadn't allowed himself to entertain the idea of higher education. But now, with everything changing, he found himself daring to imagine a future beyond his immediate responsibilities. I don't know," Leo replied, his voice uncertain. "I always wanted to be a teacher, you know. I thought maybe one day I could help kids like me, kids who feel like they don't have anyone in their corner." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "I think you'd make a great teacher. You've already taught me so much without even trying." The sincerity in Jake's voice brought a lump to Leo's throat. For so long, he had felt invisible, overlooked by a world that seemed to only see his poverty and struggles. But now, for the first time, someone was seeing him for who he truly was: his strength, his resilience, and his dreams. It was a feeling he couldn't fully describe, but it made him believe that maybe, just maybe, he was worthy of a brighter future. One evening, Mrs. Turner invited Leo to an event at her organization's community center. She had arranged for him to meet Mr. Collins, a retired teacher, who now served as a mentor for young students aspiring to enter the field of education. Mr. Collins had heard about Leo's story through Mrs. Turner and was eager to meet him. As Leo entered the bustling room, filled with students, mentors, and community leaders, he felt a mix of excitement and nerves. This was a new world, one he had never dreamed of entering, and it was all because someone had seen his potential. Mr. Collins greeted him with a warm handshake and an easy smile. "So, you're Leo," he said, his voice rich with kindness. "I've heard quite a bit about you. A young man with a lot of heart, I'm told." Leo blushed, feeling both honored and slightly overwhelmed. They sat together, and Mr. Collins asked about Leo's life, his family, and his dreams. Leo found himself opening up in a way he hadn't before, sharing his story not as a tale of hardship, but as a testament to his resilience and determination. After their conversation, Mr. Collins gave him a firm nod. "You have the makings of a great teacher, Leo. Teaching isn't just about knowledge. It's about empathy, understanding, and a willingness to guide others. You've already lived that in ways most people never do." Those words stayed with Leo, echoing in his mind as he navigated the next few months. He threw himself into his studies with renewed vigor, buoyed by the encouragement and support of his mentors, friends, and family. And as he dedicated himself to his dreams, he found that his life began to change in ways he had never imagined. One day, during a school assembly, Mr. Adams took the stage to announce a new scholarship program funded by local businesses and community members. To Leo's astonishment, Mr. Adams announced that the inaugural scholarship, created to honor students who demonstrated resilience and dedication, was being awarded to none other than Leo himself. The applause that filled the auditorium was thunderous, with students and teachers alike cheering for the boy who had once been the target of scorn and ridicule. Leo stood up slowly, his heart pounding, his vision blurring as he walked to the stage. This moment felt surreal, a validation of everything he had endured, a symbol of how far he had come. As he accepted the scholarship, he looked out at the faces in the crowd. His classmates, once strangers, were now friends. Teachers who had seen him struggle were now allies. And his mother, sitting in the front row with tears streaming down her face, was his greatest champion. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their support wrap around him like a warm blanket, and in that moment, he knew his life would never be the same. After the assembly, Leo found himself surrounded by friends and well-wishers. Even those who had once mocked him approached, offering words of congratulations and apology. It was as if the community had collectively acknowledged their past mistakes and had chosen to lift him up rather than push him down. Jake gave him a proud grin, clapping him on the shoulder. "You did it, man," Jake said, his eyes shining with pride. "You've been through so much, and you deserve every bit of this." Leo smiled, a wave of gratitude washing over him. He knew he hadn't achieved this alone. It was the quiet support of Mr. Adams, the guidance of Mrs. Turner and Mr. Collins, and the friendship of people like Jake that had made it possible. They had shown him that even in the darkest of times, kindness and compassion could light the way. As he walked home that evening, Leo felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. The hardships weren't over. He knew he still had challenges to face, dreams to chase, and responsibilities to uphold. But now he faced them with the knowledge that he wasn't alone. He had a community behind him, friends by his side, and a future that, for the first time, felt within reach. In the months that followed, Leo continued his journey, knowing he was no longer defined by his struggles, but by his resilience. His story became a source of inspiration within the community, a reminder of the strength found in vulnerability and the power of unity. And though he had once been mocked for his worn clothes and calloused hands, he now stood proudly as a symbol of hope, resilience, and the remarkable things that could happen when a community chose to uplift rather than judge. Leo's story reminded everyone that sometimes it only took one act of kindness to change a life forever, and that, in the end, the smallest gestures could leave the biggest impact. The months that followed were a whirlwind of transformation for Leo, who had once believed that he was destined to remain in the shadows, working tirelessly and silently to support his family. Now, with the scholarship in hand and the support of his community behind him, he began to envision a new path, one filled with opportunity and hope. His mother, still recovering but stronger every day, watched with a mixture of pride and gratitude as Leo's life unfolded in ways she'd once thought impossible. She, too, began to dream again, daring to imagine a life where her children could rise above the limitations they had always known. But change, as Leo quickly discovered, came with its own set of challenges. While he now had the freedom to focus on his studies, he faced the daunting task of catching up academically after years of juggling schoolwork with multiple jobs. His schedule, though less grueling than before, was still full: classes during the day, tutoring sessions in the evenings, and visits to his part-time job at the gas station a few nights a week. Yet he approached each day with a newfound sense of purpose, driven by the belief that he was working towards something greater. One evening, while at the community center for a tutoring session, Leo had an unexpected conversation with Mr. Collins, the retired teacher who had taken him under his wing. Mr. Collins had become both a mentor and a friend, guiding Leo through academic hurdles and offering wisdom from his years in education. As they sat together in the quiet study room, surrounded by books and notes, Mr. Collins looked at Leo thoughtfully. "Leo, I want to ask you something," he began, his voice calm yet serious. "What do you want to accomplish with all of this? I know you've talked about teaching, about helping kids who might be going through what you've experienced. But beyond that, what's the legacy you want to leave?" Leo was taken aback. He had never considered his journey in terms of a legacy. He had always thought in practical terms: finish school, find a stable job, support his family. But now, as he thought about it, a deeper vision began to take shape. He saw a future where he wasn't just surviving but thriving, where he was part of a system that uplifted others, especially those who came from circumstances like his own. He wanted to be a voice for kids who were overlooked, who struggled in silence, who carried burdens beyond their years. I want to make sure that kids like me don't feel alone," Leo replied slowly, his voice filled with conviction. "I want them to know that there's a way out, that people care, even if it doesn't feel like it. I know what it's like to feel invisible, like no one sees you or what you're going through. I want to be the kind of teacher who changes that." Mr. Collins nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "That's a powerful vision, Leo, and I believe you can do it. You've already inspired more people than you know." The words stayed with Leo, fueling his determination. He threw himself into his studies, spending hours in the library, often staying late into the night to finish assignments and prepare for exams. His academic performance improved steadily, and his teachers took notice, impressed by the transformation they saw. Mr. Adams continued to be a source of support, offering encouragement and advice whenever Leo felt overwhelmed. But despite the progress, there were moments when Leo's doubts crept in, shadows of the insecurities he had carried for so long. Some days, he wondered if he truly deserved the opportunities he'd been given, if he was worthy of the faith his community had placed in him. These thoughts would linger, especially on nights when he was alone, the weight of his past mingling with the fears of his future. One such night, as he was working through a particularly challenging math problem, he received a call from Jake. They had become close friends, with Jake often staying late after school to help Leo study or simply to chat about life. Tonight, however, Jake sounded different, more excited than usual. "Hey Leo, "I've got some big news," Jake said, barely able to contain his excitement. "My dad's company is holding a community recognition event next week, and they want to honor you. They heard about everything you've done, and they want to recognize you for your hard work and resilience. They're even giving a small scholarship as part of it." Leo was stunned, the words washing over him in a mix of disbelief and amazement. He had never imagined that his efforts, which he had always seen as simply doing what was necessary, would be recognized in such a public way. A scholarship would mean even more freedom to pursue his dreams, more stability for his family. When the night of the event arrived, Leo found himself standing on a stage in front of a packed room, surrounded by people who had come to celebrate him. His mother sat in the front row, her eyes brimming with tears, her face glowing with pride. Mr. Adams, Mrs. Turner, Mr. Collins, and even Mr. Kowalski from the gas station were there, along with classmates, teachers, and members of the community who had heard his story. The applause was thunderous, and Leo felt a wave of emotion rise within him as he looked out at the sea of faces. The host invited him to say a few words, and as Leo took the microphone, he paused, gathering his thoughts. This was his moment, not just to thank those who had helped him, but to share the story that had brought him here, the journey that had transformed him. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me, for believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself. For so long, I felt invisible, like my struggles were mine alone to bear. But each of you, you showed me that no one has to walk this path alone." He took a deep breath, glancing at his mother, who nodded, encouraging him to continue. "There was a time when I thought my life was set, that I would always be fighting just to survive. But with your support, I've learned that I don't have to settle for survival. I can dream. I can build a future. And I want to use that future to help others who feel like I once did, to show them that they are not alone, that they are seen, that they matter." As he spoke, he noticed tears in the eyes of some in the audience. His words resonated, touching hearts and breaking down barriers. Leo had always felt that his life was a private battle, one that went unnoticed by the world. But tonight, he realized that his journey was something more, a story of resilience, of community, of hope. When he finished, the applause was overwhelming, a standing ovation that filled the room with warmth and admiration. As Leo stepped down from the stage, people approached him, offering congratulations, words of encouragement, and even personal stories of their own struggles. He saw, in each face, the impact his journey had made, the way his resilience had given others permission to face their own challenges with hope. The event had a ripple effect throughout the community. People began talking about the importance of supporting young people, of recognizing the hidden struggles that so many carry. Local businesses and organizations pledged to support programs for underprivileged students, inspired by Leo's story. Mr. Adams, moved by the outpouring of support, proposed a new mentorship program at the school, one that would pair struggling students with community mentors, ensuring that no one would have to bear their burdens alone. Leo became a role model, a symbol of strength and determination. But more importantly, he became a beacon of hope, a reminder that no matter how difficult the journey, there were people willing to help, willing to stand beside those in need. He returned to school with a new sense of purpose, knowing that his story had touched lives and that he had the power to make a difference, not just for himself, but for others. In the days that followed, as he walked through the hallways of his school, Leo noticed the glances his classmates gave him were no longer filled with judgment or pity, but with admiration and respect. His life had changed, not just because of the opportunities he had been given, but because he had chosen to open himself up to others, to let them see his struggles and his strength. And in doing so, he had shown them a side of himself and of life that many had never understood before. He knew his journey was far from over. There were still challenges to face, dreams to chase, and battles to win. But Leo was ready. He was no longer the invisible boy hiding in the shadows. He was a young man with a future, a dream, and a community that believed in him. And as he looked ahead, he knew that whatever came his way, he would face it with courage, with hope, and with the knowledge that he was not alone. Leo's story became a testament to the power of resilience, a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in enduring alone, but in finding the courage to lean on others. And for those who heard his story, it was a call to action, a reminder to look closer, to see the hidden battles, and to stand by those who needed it most. In the end, Leo had become more than a survivor. He had become a light in the darkness, illuminating a path that others would follow, knowing that, like him, they too could rise above any obstacle. In the months after the recognition event, Leo's life continued to blossom in ways he had never imagined. Opportunities that once felt distant, even impossible, were now within his reach. The community's support hadn't just been a fleeting moment of applause. It had ignited a lasting wave of change. People who had once looked past him, dismissing him as just another kid from a struggling family, now saw him for the extraordinary young man he was becoming, a symbol of perseverance and quiet strength. And though Leo was grateful, he remained grounded, committed to his family, and to the purpose that had driven him all along, making sure no one else ever felt as alone as he once had. One day, while Leo was volunteering at the community center that had supported him, he was approached by a young boy, about 12 years old, who looked as if he'd been hesitating to approach Leo for quite some time. The boy was small, with clothes that hung a bit too loosely, and he clutched his backpack tightly, his eyes downcast. Leo recognized something familiar in the boy's posture, the way he seemed to shrink in on himself, wary of taking up too much space, too afraid to be seen. It reminded him painfully of how he had once felt, carrying his burdens silently, afraid to let anyone in. The boy finally looked up at him, his voice barely a whisper. Are you Leo?" Leo smiled gently, kneeling down to meet the boy's eye level. "That's me. What's your name?" "Adam," the boy replied, his voice soft but growing a bit bolder with Leo's warm response. "I heard about you, about how you kept going, even when things were really hard. My mom, she works a lot, and sometimes it's just me and my little sister. I don't know if I can keep up with school and helping her." Leo felt a pang in his chest. Here was a young version of himself, another kid trying to bear the weight of adult responsibilities far too soon. But this time, Leo was there, ready to offer the support he had once longed for. "I know it's tough, Adam," Leo said, his voice filled with empathy. "But you don't have to do it alone. There are people who want to help, people who understand what you're going through. And I'm here too, whenever you need someone to talk to, or if you need help with school." Adam's eyes filled with hope, and he nodded, a small smile breaking through his initial shyness. Leo felt an immense sense of purpose, realizing that his journey had led him to this very moment. He had become the kind of person he'd once needed, the kind who could see the invisible struggles and offer a hand, a kind word, a bit of hope. As the weeks went by, Leo began mentoring Adam, helping him with homework and encouraging him to pursue his interests. Word of Leo's mentorship spread through the community, and soon more young kids were reaching out, drawn to the story of the boy who had overcome so much. Leo, despite his own busy schedule, took each of them under his wing, creating an informal support group where they could study, talk, and lean on one another. His dedication did not go unnoticed. One evening, after a particularly rewarding study session with Adam and a few other kids, Mr. Adams called Leo into his office. The room was quiet, the soft light of evening casting a warm glow on the bookshelves and the awards lining the walls. "Leo, I've been watching the way you've taken these younger kids under your wing," Mr. Adams began, pride evident in his voice. "You've turned your own challenges into something powerful, something that's changing lives." Leo looked down, modest as always, but Mr. Adams continued. "The school board wants to recognize you officially, not just as a student, but as a community leader. They're setting up a scholarship fund in your name, a fund that will support other students who are facing hardships, just as you did. This fund will help them with school supplies, meals, and tutoring, and it'll ensure they don't have to fight their battles alone." Leo was speechless. A scholarship fund, in his name. The honor felt surreal, but he understood the significance. His struggles, his victories, none of it had been in vain. He had paved a way for others, creating a legacy that would continue long after he graduated. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Leo accepted, promising Mr. Adams that he would do everything in his power to honor the trust that had been placed in him. The months passed in a blur, and soon Leo was preparing to graduate. He had been accepted to a university nearby, where he planned to study education with a focus on community outreach and social work. His dream of becoming a teacher had evolved, growing into a vision of using his experience to build bridges for others. He wanted to empower students who, like him, had felt invisible, trapped by circumstances beyond their control. And now, with the support of his community and the scholarship funds he had earned, that dream was within reach. Graduation day was a whirlwind of emotions. As he walked across the stage to accept his diploma, he felt the weight of his journey settle around him. The years of struggle, the sacrifices, the moments of doubt, and the acts of kindness that had carried him through. His family sat in the front row, his mother beaming with pride, his siblings cheering as loudly as they could. Mr. Adams, Mrs. Turner, and Mr. Collins watched from the audience, each of them a pillar in Leo's life, their faces filled with pride and joy. After the ceremony, Leo was swarmed by friends, classmates, and community members, all eager to congratulate him. Jake, who had become more than just a friend, a true brother in every sense, embraced him, clapping him on the back. "We made it, man," Jake said, his voice choked with emotion. "You showed us all what it means to never give up." Leo nodded, swallowing back tears. "I couldn't have done it without you, Jake. You stood by me when no one else did." The following week, the community center held a celebration in Leo's honor, where he was presented with a plaque and the official announcement of the Leo Scholarship Fund. As he stood before the crowd, holding the plaque in his hands, he took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling over him. "This isn't just for me," Leo began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This fund, this support, it's for every kid out there who feels like they don't belong, who feels like they have to carry their burdens alone. I know what that feels like, and I'm here to tell you, you don't have to do it alone. We're here for each other, and together, we can build a future where no one has to feel invisible." The applause was deafening, and as Leo looked out at the faces of his community, he felt a surge of pride. He had come so far, transformed by hardship and strengthened by the kindness of those who believed in him. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, but he was ready for them. He was no longer the boy in worn-out clothes, bearing his struggles alone. He was Leo, a symbol of resilience, a guide for others, and a beacon of hope. As he left the celebration that night, surrounded by his family, friends, and the young kids he now mentored, Leo felt a deep, unshakable peace. He had turned his pain into purpose, his struggles into strength, and his journey into a story that would inspire others for years to come. Under the starlit sky, Leo took one last look at the community center that had become a second home. He whispered a quiet vow to himself, a promise to continue this path, to reach out to those in need, to lift others as he had been lifted. His life had changed, and in turn, he had changed the lives of countless others. And as he walked forward into the night, he knew that he was no longer walking alone. He was surrounded by the love, support, and hope of a community that would always be a part of him. Leo's story would be passed down, a tale of resilience that echoed through the town, a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from standing alone, but from allowing others to stand with you. His legacy would live on in the lives he had touched, in the scholarship fund that would support future students, and in the hearts of those who had witnessed his journey. He was more than a survivor. He was a testament to the power of compassion and he had proven that even the most ordinary person could create extraordinary change.